Now we are really down memory lane in St. John, New Brunswick, where it all happened 58 years ago. The drive from Inverness was just awful, but we took a break at Moncton to see the magnetic hill, which GM remembered. We just came backwards up that hill down there in neutral. Finally, after 5.5 hours, we reached the Hilton, but not after a problem in St. John because the GPS and the Hilton were not in sync. However, we had a nice view from our window of the harbour. After a good night's rest to recover, we set out to explore and to remember St. John. GM's ancestors were Empire Loyalists, but they didn't settle in New Brunswick, but went west. King Street is the main street looking down towards the harbour and used to have all the shops. The first place we found was St. John High School, where GM was a student. And we had difficulty finding the entrance, and actually we entered by the janitor's entrance. But we got a very nice tour of the building by one of the janitors. He showed us where we could find the class of 58, and sure enough, there was GM. We now move forward to 61, and there was the church, Trinity Church, where it all happened on July the 8th. It still looked beautiful inside, and we had a nice tour after some difficulty getting into the church. We made a small donation to cover some of the costs of the renovations that the church was going through. Looking now down towards the altar, where we said I do, and we still say I do. The lady who showed us into the church then gave us a brief tour and pointed out a number of things, including the fact that there was a statue of Queen Victoria at the back of the church, and she was wearing earrings. The Admiral Beatty was a hotel in those days. It's now an old people's home where Granny and Papa stayed, and I spent my last night of freedom, as some people say. Across the street was the King Square Park, and on the other side of the square was the building where Higgy had his office. And GM used to go there to get a lift home after school. On one side of King Street was an enclosed market with vegetables and meats and restaurants and items made locally for sale. This is the famous Reversing Falls, for which St. John is well known. Now you'll notice that the river is going down and into the sea, and those birds down there are floating down the river. Now what we're hoping is that in another hour the birds will actually be floating up the river. Suddenly hundreds of cormorants have appeared. Look at them. I don't know if you can see them there. Something down over there. There must be a lot of fish around. Now we could be up there on the skywalk, but we're not. We're down here in the river, and if you look carefully now over on this side, you can see that the water is now actually going up the river. So the tide has turned. Now you can definitely see the water going up the river. Looking back across the river, that was where Grana's car skidded in the ice and almost went into the river. She was very lucky the car was caught on a rock and didn't slide down the bank into the water. Now the cormorants were flying under the bridge, going back down towards the harbour. GM worked in the New Brunswick Museum before we got married, but it's now moved to a new location. And we located the Union Club where we had our reception, but it was closed. The next day it was off to Westfield for lunch with the Likely family, who were neighbours and good friends of the Higginses. We met at the golf club, golf and country club, and had a little walk before the others arrived. At the first tee, the Higgins house was just beyond the trees that you can see on the third hole. GM used to play off the white tees when she was here, and there's a dip there you can see, and she would get up the bank, try to swing.
I do remember trying to get up that hill, so hopefully I'll just continue to change.
We meet up with the Likeleys, Mike and Charlotte on the left, and Janet and Nancy on the right. Janet visited us at West at Greystone and is Mike's sister. Nancy is a cousin. Mike is the Deputy Mayor of Grand Bay and Westfield and takes us for a tour past the ferry which crosses the River St. John. At the dock is a sculpture done by foreign artists who visit New Brunswick every year and do various sculptures. The local school where Gia went to school when she moved to New Brunswick. And then there's the Higgins residence, which used to be yellow. Unfortunately, the new owners were not there, so we couldn't visit, but we got a nice view of down the river and a final shot of the Likeleys. Mike Likely is, of course, Mike Higgins' best friend. Next morning, it's off to the ferry to go to Digby, and the rain was probably harder than we'd ever seen it. The ferry was quite comfortable. It was a 3-hour trip, and there were very few passengers or cars on it. The weather is still miserable in Nova Scotia, but we drive to Halifax and then take the plane to Montreal.